Georg Lassen, U-boat commander. War Machiner presents Georg Lassen, The Efficiency of Withdrawal. War Machiner. When we talk about the great U-boat aces of the Second World War, the conversation is almost always dominated by one metric: the tonnage war. We remember Kretschmer for his one torpedo, one ship precision. We remember Prien for his audacity at Scapa Flow. But there is a fundamental misconception embedded in how we view these men: War Machiner. We tend to think of the top commanders as aggressive hunters, men who pushed the attack relentlessly until the depth charges drove them down. That image makes for good cinema, but it misses the colder truth of survival: War Machiner. Georg Lassen ended the war as the 10th most successful ace, with over 156,000 tons sunk, but his record reveals something most casual histories ignore. He did the majority of his damage not in the North Atlantic convoy lanes, but in what were considered secondary theaters. And more importantly, his survival, and the survival of his crew, wasn't due to how well he attacked, it was due to how well he withdrew. War Machiner. The lesson that gets overlooked in the study of men like Lassen is that in the deep ocean, the victor is not the one who sinks the most ships, but the one who knows exactly when the tactical advantage flips from hunter to hunted. Lassen understood that a U-boat's best weapon wasn't its torpedoes, it was its ability to be somewhere else. To understand his strategy, you have to stop looking at the moment of the kill and start looking at the hours after it. The apprenticeship that mattered wasn't just about learning to shoot. Before he took command of U-160, Georg Lassen served as the first watch officer under Otto Schuhart on U-29. This is a critical detail that gets glossed over in most citations, but it is the foundation of his entire approach. On September 17, 1939, U-29 sank the British aircraft carrier HMS Courageous. That was a massive psychological victory for the Kriegsmarine, but for Lassen, the real education came immediately after the torpedoes hit. The escort destroyers didn't just mount a search, they conducted a retaliatory hunt that lasted for hours. U-29 had to go deep, stay silent, and endure. Lassen watched how Schuhart managed the boat's atmosphere, the crew's morale, and the battery consumption while sitting helpless on the bottom. He learned that a kill means nothing if you can't survive the pursuit. This experience instilled in him a patience that would define his command style. When he took over U-160, a Type 1XC, he wasn't just commanding a weapons platform, he was managing a mobile survival habitat. The shift from the American coast to the South Atlantic wasn't random, it was calculated. By early 1942, the happy times off the American East Coast were beginning to curdle. The Americans were getting organized, implementing blackouts, and running coastal convoys. Lassen's first patrol with U-160 was indeed successful, sinking ships like the City of New York. But, a purely tactical mind would have kept returning to the same well. Lassen, however, understood operational geography. He looked at the map and saw the gap. On his later patrols, he pushed south. He went to the Caribbean, and more importantly, he went to the waters off South Africa and into the Indian Ocean. This wasn't just wandering, this was strategic evasion. The Allies' anti-submarine assets were concentrated in the North Atlantic. By moving to the periphery, Cape Town, Durban, Madagascar, he found targets that were just as valuable but defended by navies that were stretched thin and, honestly, often inexperienced. The attack on convoy DN-21 off Durban in March of 1943 is the textbook example of this. In less than 5 hours, he sank or damaged 6 ships totaling over 41,000 tons. Most historians cite this as an example of his aggression. But look closer. He did it at night, on the surface, using his high speed to dart in and out of the convoy. He wasn't fighting the escorts, he was exploiting the gaps they couldn't cover. He was fighting the convoy's geometry, not its guns. The decision to hold back is harder than the decision to attack. This is where Lassen's strategy diverges from the more famous aces. Kretschmer was captured, Prien was killed, Schepke was killed. They pushed the envelope until the envelope pushed back. Lassen, by mid-1943, was pulled from operational command and made an instructor with the 1st U-boot Lehr Division. On the surface, this looks like a promotion, a reward for his success, but in the context of the U-boat arm in 1943, it was survival. The spring of 1943 was Black May for the U-boats. The Allies had cracked the codes, perfected radar, and started hunting wolf packs with escort carriers and support groups. Lassen got out just before the massacre truly began. He went from sinking ships to teaching future commanders. And what did he teach them? He taught them tactics, yes, but the men he trained were going into a war where the life expectancy of a U-boat commander was measured in weeks. The fact that Lassen was chosen to train them suggests that his value wasn't in his bravado, but in his understanding of how to survive long enough to be effective. The ultimate strategy: outliving the war. Look at Lassen's post-war life. He didn't die in a collapsing bunker or in a POW camp. He lost an arm in a traffic accident decades later and died in Spain at the age of 96. His ashes were scattered at sea. This is the final and most important lesson of Georg Lassen. In a service branch that suffered over 70% casualty rate, Lassen survived. He survived because he understood that the tonnage war was a means to an end, not an end in itself. When he was given command of the hospital ship Pretoria in April of 1945, tasked with evacuating wounded soldiers and the coffins of Hindenburg and his wife from the path of the Red Army, he didn't refuse. He didn't try to fight. He transitioned from warfighting to survival. He got the ship out. Georg Lassen's career forces us to recalibrate our definition of a military genius. We are drawn to the dramatic last stand, the final desperate attack. But Lassen's strategy was one of preservation. He understood that in a war of attrition, your primary duty is to not be the one who is attrited. He took the fight to the weak points, withdrew when the strong points mobilized, and when the war was clearly lost, he focused on bringing his people home. That is the part of the story that the tonnage lists don't show. It's the part that matters. Remembering Lassen isn't about celebrating the tonnage he sent to the bottom. It is about understanding that in the brutal arithmetic of war, the man who comes home has a perspective that the dead hero does not. And sometimes, that perspective is the only thing worth passing on.